Sizing up Murphy, drives, floats, hangs, and scores on the turnaround. J-Dub way behind the three-point line and hits way behind the three-point line. Got blocked. What a rejection by Holmgren. Standing tall like a wall.
This is Udart. You're listening to the Uncontested.
What is up, Thunder fans, and welcome to the Uncontested Post-Game Podcast Edition. I am your host for tonight, Tayler Peterson. You can find me on all social media platforms at Tayler_P15. I am joined by none other, fellas. It's a Sega Baba for the guys here at the Uncontested. We did our group podcast last night. Really just focused a lot on the crazy NBA trade landscape, the huge trades between, obviously the Fox trade and the Luka trade. Had a lot of fun with it. And I think we broke a lot of it down and did a really good job of some of the analysis. Some of the things we said actually kind of came out today. I'm really proud of that. Thought it was a lot of fun just have the full group back together. So highly encourage you all, desperate and as excited as we are for some trade slop, to go and listen to last night's podcast. But like I said, tonight, Sega Baba for the Uncontested, not for the Thunder. So I'm rolling solo tonight. Before we get into tonight's game, we are a proud part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and also proudly brought to you all from our sponsors over at Prairie Artisan Ales. We'll get into the Prairie Artisan Ales player of the game here later today, later in the podcast. Should be fun, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But greatly appreciate all of you guys who have been reaching out to us, talking about hitting up Prairie, going there for games, going over there for their Sunday trivia. It's a great spot to watch all sporting events. I think the other weekend they had the Thunder game and the Chiefs playoff game going on at the same time, and that's my kind of party. So greatly appreciate all of you who have been supporting them as well, because they're awesome sponsors to us. Also, be sure, if you look in the top left hand corner of the screen, you'll see a QR code. Very nice, fancy QR code made by our guy Justin for you guys to just easily be able to scan and join our Patreon. Join the Patreon. The biggest perk there is the Discord, which has been awesome. You guys hear us talk about it before every single podcast. We're having a ton of fun, even on nights like tonight where they're blowout games. Just great discourse about just about everything, but especially Thunder basketball and NBA. So if you want an awesome community to talk about the trade deadline this week, with all the big trades going down, as soon as you get that Shams notification, be sure to join the Patreon, join the Discord. You'll get bonus podcasts as well. I believe 2 each month. And then we actually have some live watch parties we do in the Discord. The next one being this Saturday against the Memphis Grizzlies. So I think that's all the housekeeping there for the Uncontested. Time to dive into quite the game for the Thunder as they get their second straight blowout win, which is pretty nice. Not having to stress about these games. Thunder destroy the Wisconsin Herd, 125-96. You may say, who's the Wisconsin Herd? And that is the Milwaukee Bucks G League team, because as we'll get into, that's essentially who played tonight. And honestly, the 125-96 score, way closer than what the game actually was, because the Thunder basically played their two-way guys, all three of them, Oos and one of Jay Will Kenrich at the 5 for all the fourth quarter. So, it was basically a 40-point game the entirety of the game. But Thunder dominated from start to finish, led by none other than their MVP and superstar Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. This follows the Kings game Saturday night, pre-Fox trade, where Thunder won by 34. So the Thunder, the big thing here for me is just the Thunder taking care of business before getting some much needed and deserved time off, even when shorthanded heading into the trade. The trade deadline, but also the All-Star break coming up here in another 2 weeks, which is really huge for this team. We're oftentimes, especially teams at the top of their conferences, you kind of see them a little lackadaisical in what we call the dog days of the NBA season. And so for the Thunder to come out like they have the past 2 nights at home has been huge. And like I said, they also have been shorthanded. So my takeaways from tonight's game. First one is usually the top of our list every single game. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, pretty good at basketball. We'll break down his stat line and what he did in very limited minutes tonight because the Thunder didn't really need him. Second one is the Thunder role players shooting home versus away splits, plus the team splits. And the reason I brought this one up is because after Saturday night's game, Aaron Wiggins' 40 piece, I think I mentioned this last night on the group podcast, but I was curious to look up the Thunder's shooting at home versus away and their role players. And I think that just makes, what I looked up, I think kind of seems to validate my hypothesis there. I sounded so nerdy. My hypothesis there. And just shows why maintaining home court advantage throughout the majority of the playoffs, all the way through the Western Conference Finals, is going to be so important for this team. My third one, kind of unexpected. The Oos was loose. OJ to Ousmane, as I like to call him, for all of you rap fans growing up, OJ the Juice Man. That nickname hasn't quite caught on, but I'm still working on it. Had his second career 20-plus point game tonight, 1 point shy of a career high, so we'll be sure to break his game down, and then I'll get some thoughts on some other bench players. Be sure to drop your questions. We'll try and get through these at the end if time allows, and also if time allows, I'll just kind of touch on some of the NBA trade deadline slop that came out today, post Fox trade last night, heading into Thursday's deadline. So there's some pregame notes, like I mentioned. I mentioned this for the Bucks, but no Dub, Kaysen, or Caruso, and obviously Chet for the Thunder tonight. Dub and Kaysen and Caruso were all three questionable heading into tonight's game, which is promising. But we immediately saw, like with the first injury report today that the Bucks released, that Giannis wasn't playing, Middleton wasn't playing, Dame was questionable. And then shortly after, Dame was announced not playing. And then right before the game, it was announced that Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez were all ruled out. And so as soon as we got the news that Giannis was going to be out here like an hour or two later, when the Thunder released their next injury report, there was no Dub, Kaysen, or Caruso because the Thunder didn't need them. And they proved that tonight. More rest for those guys, which is huge. I don't find that discouraging or like worrisome. I think it's actually very promising. They were all three questionable. At least one or two probably could have played if needed, but it wasn't needed. And they got additional rest with another night of rest tomorrow before the schedule kind of ramps up a little bit before entering into the All-Star break. So because of that, the Thunder started SGA, Dort, Aaron Wiggins, Kenrich Williams, and Hartenstein. And honestly, that was a really fun lineup. Kind of like to see maybe a little more of that. They were pretty disruptive defensively and thought they got out in transition very well. And then on the other side, the flip side of the coin, the Bucks started Ryan Rollins, AJ Green, Andre Jackson Jr., Taurean Prince, and Chris Livingston. And I quote tweeted that with which basically what's become a meme here for us Thunder fans during the tanking years. Can't remember what year exactly that was. When we started Isaiah Roby, Georgios Kalat. I'm going to butcher this. Georgius, Jalen Horde, V. Kretschke, and Captain Hook himself, Zion Simpson. Quite the time there. Obviously, I think our lineup was a little worse than what the Bucks threw out there. But my point being, the Bucks played absolutely no one due to injury, and also it just makes you wonder with Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez sending out if potentially those are guys currently in trade discussions. So the Bucks are one team that I'm definitely keeping an eye on heading into the trade deadline. Really quickly, just a quick recap of the game. The first quarter, the Thunder, like I said, just came out dominant from the beginning. It was a 13-4 run lead after the first 3 minutes against Milwaukee, and 10 of the 13 points for the Thunder came in the paint, which is kind of a big theme. Shai had 19 of the Thunder's 32 in 8 minutes of gameplay. He was just driving to the rim and wasn't even being defended at all. It's like the memes you see of like the security guards who just barely are like waving people down with the wand and just letting them in. That's what the Wisconsin Herd were, how they were defending Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, which is a pretty bold strategy. Shai had 21 points in the first quarter, which is the third time this season Shai has scored 20 plus in a quarter, which is insane. We saw Dump Truck Dukas, shout out our guy Jacob, get a little first quarter burn in the rotation. And the Thunder led 39-22 after one. They shot 65% from the floor, 3 of 5 from 3. Like I said, a lot of those points just really kind of came in the paint. Meanwhile, the Milwaukee Bucks just didn't really do anything. Second quarter happened. OKC just they had a 7-point possession play where Isaiah Joe gets fouled on the 3-point shot. They call flagrant, and it was unintentional, but Prince basically landed in Isaiah Joe's landing spot, which resulted in the flagrant. So Isaiah Joe hits his free throw, 4 points. The Thunder get the ball back out of bounds because of the flagrant, which leads to, I believe, a Jay Will 3. So the Thunder scored a touchdown there in one possession, which is pretty insane, and just kept the gas pedal down from there. Shai played the last 4:41 of the second quarter. He didn't play any of the second quarter before that. I thought that was going to be it for him tonight, but he still ends the half with 30 plus before halftime. Second game in 3 nights doing so. Leads all players in 30 plus halves, and obviously leads all players with 30 plus games this season in the league with 29 of those games. And so assuming, knock on wood, that he's able to score another 30 points here with some of these games this week coming up, that 30th 30-point game will be a lot of fun. So something to look forward to later this week. Our guy Clemente tweeted this out. SGA scored 30 points in 17 minutes in the first half, and that's the second fewest minutes required to reach 30-plus point games, 30-plus points in a game in NBA history. Kevin Love did it quicker. So that's kind of insane. And then he also had 4 assists, 2 rebounds, 13 of 17 from the floor, 2 of 3 from 3 on only 3 free throws. And he did all that in 17 minutes. And at that point, Thunder were up 78-44. And like I said, basically didn't look back. In the third quarter, I was a little surprised because the starters actually started the second half. And I'm not sure why, unless Shai wanted a 40-piece for the MVP, or Mark just kind of wanted to keep them in rhythm after, it's kind of been, they only had one other game back Saturday, had a little bit of a break. They have another break before playing again on Wednesday night. But the main reason is probably because the Thunder were shorthanded. And so you didn't want to just roll out basically 5 guys from the end of the bench and play them an entire half. And I understand that to an extent, but I think Shai probably, he only scored 4 points, I think, in that third quarter through the 6 minutes he played. I think he probably could have sat and Thunder would have been just fine. You can mix in guys like Ihart and Wiggins and Joe and Lou Dort, even some players like that with some of these other end of the bench role players. Maybe you don't win by as much, but you guarantee Shai's healthy. Regardless, it didn't matter. Knock on wood, Shai didn't get injured. Nobody seemed to get injured other than Lou Dort from the starters, who took like a unintentional back of the head to the lip and got a bloody lip. So, it ended up being okay. SGA ended with 34 points. Like I said, he's pulled about midway through the third. Jay Will had a putback dunk there. It was pretty cool, followed by a 3. Then Isaiah Joe hits another 3. That put the Thunder up 43. It's a lot of 3s. Speaking of a lot of 3s, that was Isaiah Joe's 500th career made 3-pointer. That's pretty insane for a guy who was waived by the 76ers and picked up by the Thunder during the rebuilding years and has turned into a huge role player for this team, especially after even kind of a slow start shooting. This season, he's been huge for the Thunder. We'll get into him a little more. Us comes in. The Us remained loose. Had an insane 2-handed putback dunk. He hit a 3, then had another 2-handed dunk transition. Looked much more aggressive. We'll get into him. And then basically the Thunder led by 40 after 3. Fourth quarter, Us remained loose. Us started missing shots and the game got boring. Jay Will got 2 straight blocks and cussed loudly, which was awesome. He said, "Get that shit out of here." And then he did it again and said, "Get that shit out of here." And it was awesome. And then the Thunder won by a lot. So there's your game recap. Big takeaways. Shai was pretty incredible. I already kind of listed off a lot of what, some of the big stats that came out from tonight's game. Sorry, I got to get back to tonight's game. I was looking ahead at the schedule for the Thunder, but he ends with 34 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists, 15 of 19 from the floor, 2 of 3 from 3, only 3 free throw attempts for all the Shai is a free throw merchant people out there. And he did it in only 22 minutes. Pretty incredible, efficient game from Shai. It looked effortless because it was. One thing, I guess, really to take away from Shai's game, other than the stats I rattled off during the game breakdown, is just that we continue to see Shai's 3-point shooting coming along. I actually wish I would have pulled this up before the podcast, but over his last 5, over his last 10, I feel like we'd see a trend of his 3-point efficiency trending upward, and that's scary and awesome. And I hope we continue to see that, especially as the games continue to get bigger and we come out of the All-Star break and hopefully this team's somewhere healthy. That's a lethal weapon to have, especially when he's your MVP candidate and doing everything else that he's doing, like 15 of 19 from the floor and just getting to the paint at will. So Shai was obviously incredible. Thunder role players. And I mentioned them, their home shooting versus their away splits, plus the team splits as a whole. And I mentioned I wanted to look this up at the top of the podcast. I wanted to look it up after Saturday's game where Aaron Wiggins dropped his 40 ball because it made me reminisce some on that Knicks game that I was fortunate to be at in December. And just seeing these role players who seem to play so much better when the Thunder are at home. So I wanted to look it up. And it's not quite as drastic as I maybe would have guessed, but it certainly seems to be a bit of a trend. I'm not sure if these stats actually include tonight's game, because if they did, they might even be more drastic. So maybe I'll look them back up tomorrow morning and then provide updates at some point this week. But the Thunder are shooting 36% from three on 39.8 attempts at home. That's in comparison to 34.5% from three on 37.7 three-point attempts away. So not a huge discrepancy there, but they're shooting about 2% better as a team and on about 2 3-point attempts more per game. So again, nothing too drastic there. But then you look at some individual players, and the two I wanted to obviously bring up were Wiggins and Isaiah Joe. Wiggins is shooting 37% from three on 4.3 attempts at home, 35% away, so about 2% difference there on 3.4 attempts per game. Again, not super huge. This is where it gets fun. Isaiah Joe, 41.6% on 6.3 three-point attempts at home in comparison to 37% on 6.2 attempts away. He's shooting basically the same attempts per game from three, home and away, and shooting about 4 percentage points better when he's at home. 41.6% from three on 6 attempts is absolutely asinine. So I was onto something there, at least with Isaiah Joe. Not so much the team as a whole, not so much Aaron Wiggins. But like I said, we'll see if that updates after tonight's game. But this is another reason, again, the reason I bring that up, it's why home court throughout the playoffs is so important, why I think it's promising that the Thunder have continued to create distance from the rest of the West with that first place spot in the West, because getting that all the way through the conference finals, assuming good health and the Thunder play well and are able to get there, that's going to be a huge benefit for them. I think that's really promising, and it's something to kind of keep in mind when it comes to playoff time. My next takeaway, the Oos was loose. And I mentioned, Trav said blink twice if you're in danger. What'd I do? The chat is just going crazy. You guys are the best. I appreciate it, but I am very confused. So I mentioned Oos, and this is probably why you're saying blink twice if you're in danger. Yeah, Oos was actually pretty awesome. And because of that, I'm giving him my King of the Prairie Artisan L's player of the game. And the reason I'm doing so is because it's really boring just to give it to Shai every single night. Obviously, Wiggins played well again, although he had his 40-piece game on Saturday. Isaiah Joe also had a great game. But I'm giving it to Usman tonight. He scored his second career 20-plus point game, which was a season high, obviously, and 1 point shy of his career high. I thought Us was great tonight. Most aggressive we've seen him almost all season, if not all season. He had, I'm pulling up his stats, 21 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 9 of 13 from the floor, 3 of 5 from 3, and he had a steal. I thought he had a block also, but he didn't. Still, 4 fouls, which actually for Us, I love, because that means he's being aggressive. It was defending aggressive. Yes, he was playing against the Herd, the Wisconsin Herd, basically. And he plays well against G League teams, as we've seen when he's playing with the Blue. But it is nice to see that starting to translate a little bit here. And I think he's been coming in here in spot minutes for the Thunder over the past 4 to 5 games and has been providing some pretty decent minutes, not from a statistical standpoint, but just more so playing very sound, giving the Thunder good minutes when they have some of these injuries. And so, yeah, I thought that was I thought he had a great night to kind of cap his recent stretch off. His offensive stats prior to tonight, I looked them up over the last 5, and they honestly were a lot worse than I thought. They still aren't great, but he's showing great upside. Like I said, he just seems more confident. We're seeing that translate a little bit from the G League, which I think is impressive. And I think Donnie's actually in the chat. Shout out Donnie. He texted me this, and I think it was a tweet from JP on Twitter, JPOSU, just mentioning how it would be a little frustrating if we saw the Thunder move on from Usman Dieng before Dylan Jones, just because it seems like Ousmane is showing more flashes. And there's a lot to get into there. Obviously, Us has been in the league a little longer. I understand Dylan's even older than Us is already, but this is still his first season in the NBA. He's going back and forth between the Blue and the Blue and the Thunder. That being said, I do agree, though. I mean, I think we're seeing more upside already from Us, which is really promising. And all that being said, it's great because Us is playing better right before the deadline, so maybe his trade value is higher. Next big takeaway. That's all I have on Usman Dieng. Probably the last time I'll talk that much about him in a long time. Maybe he gets traded. I guess my last big takeaway from this Thunder game are the Thunder bench players. And I already kind of mentioned Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins, although Wiggins started, but still he's considered kind of a bench player for this team when fully healthy. Wiggins had 13 points, 6 of 9 from the floor, 1 of 2 from 3, 25 minutes. He did a lot of initiating tonight, which I actually really liked. It's cool to see, when the Thunder are shorthanded, seeing guys like Wiggins step into unique roles that they aren't really accustomed to or don't see quite as much when the team is fully healthy. Even when Shai, in that starting lineup, we saw Wiggins kind of take on some primary ball handling duties like we kind of would see Dub do when he's healthy. And I thought he did a pretty good job of that overall. Thought he did well. And I really liked seeing him there with some of these bench guys, into the bench guys, some of the two-way guys. They kept Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe in there pretty long in the third quarter, just kind of to help stabilize and for those lamps to be a little more constructive and beneficial to these young developing players like the Usman Diengs and the Alex Ducases and the Dylan Jones, right? Instead of just throwing them all out there together in a G League lineup. I thought Aaron Wiggins kind of took control there, and I thought he did a good job. Isaiah Joe, like I mentioned, 18 points, 5 of 9 from the floor. All 5 of those were from 3. He only took 1 2-point attempt tonight, which is kind of crazy when you don't have a Dub or some of these other creators like Caruso or Kaysen that he still didn't. You would think that maybe Isaiah Joe would take on more of a on-ball role in that situation and drive him to the rim a little more. He didn't. He continued to play his game. They continued to run motions for him off ball screens and off ball to get him open. And he's finally finding his stride here over the past couple of weeks, past month, really. 5 of 8 from 3 is fantastic. 3 of 3 from the free throw line, like I mentioned, with that and one he had there in the first half. Isaiah Joe's been awesome, especially when he's playing at home, like I mentioned earlier. So that's really exciting to see a player like Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins both finding momentum here heading into the trade deadline, but heading into the All-Star break, and hopefully the Thunder come out of that All-Star break healthy. Outside of that, there's nobody. Jay Will had 13 points, 7 rebounds. He played pretty aggressive. He had a couple dunks, which was awesome. And he had those 2 blocks, like I mentioned there in the fourth quarter, which he said he intentionally tried to do because he was tired of the Carusos and the Wiggins and Dubs telling him that he can't block shots. So that's pretty cool. Obviously, he said that in a fun manner, and they were all laughing about it. But it was great to see Jay Will a little more aggressive. He also was 3 of 5 from 3, which is great. I thought Jay Will had a pretty decent game, again, against lesser competition, but still good to see. And outside of that, the other guys didn't really do much. I already talked about Us, but I've gotten some questions, like I said, talking about, like, why is Adam Flagler on a 2-way when Brandon Carlson, he's already signed 2 back-to-back 10-day contracts, and the Thunder, unless they want to sign him to a full contract, can't bring him on a 2-way because those 2-way spots are full. I think that's incredibly fair. I think he's shooting. This is from my buddy Joey. Let me pull it up really quick. Where'd it go? Joey, where'd it go? Oh, yeah. He's shooting 18% from 3 on 5 of 28. He said, if anyone was curious, that's not great for a player who really hangs his hat on being a 3-point specialist. And we've seen Flagler tear it up. I know there was a quote post game from Mark when he was asked about Flagler, saying, you guys only see when he's playing at the end of games and you don't see what we do and the work he's putting in, during practices and in the G League. It's like, but we also watch the G League games and he's struggling there some too. And it just, I think some of these 2-ways, especially now the 2-way spots have been expanded to 3 2-ways instead of 2. The Thunder use these kind of to reward players who have been in the system for a while. And the Thunder would hate me saying that. Mark would obviously push back on that if he heard this, but it's the truth. And that's kind of what this is. And I agree completely. There's no reason this team should just be giving Flagler a 2-way when you could give that to Brandon Carlson, who could actually really contribute and help this team when they're shorthanded and we're down 2 bigs like they were here a week ago when Hart and Chet were both hurt. So wanted to address that question. I think that's really all I have on the bench, and honestly, all I have from tonight's game. We can get into some trade deadline slop before we get out of here, or I can just go through your guys' questions. There's a lot of comments, so I'll just try and quickly go through as many as I can, and then we can get out of here. I'm going to Smoot always with the staple comment here each podcast. The Uncontested podcast is my favorite NBA trade podcast that occasionally talks Thunder basketball. That is right. Gosh, there's so many comments that I just like can't even filter through the questions. Smoot said, did anyone else think Chris Livingston looks like a bigger Drew Holiday? Yeah, that's a fair point. He kind of does, and he's a solid player. I don't think he's developed quite as quickly as the Bucks would have liked. At the same time, he hasn't given a ton of opportunity because he's on a contending veteran-led team. Let's see. People saying J-Dub didn't make a single shot tonight. Oh, yeah, David's a little upset. Shout out Jacob, our guy Jacob Niffen, because Jacob's not on to talk about the Oos game. He ducked it on purpose. He didn't want to have to talk positively about Oos. I now see why everybody was giving me a hard time in the chat because of the comments Nick made on last night's podcast. Thanks a lot, Nick. I did play along with it, though. Oh, man. You guys did not ask very many questions. Just a whole lot of crazy chats. Donnie, this game makes you think Dylan Jones should change his name to Doo-Doo Jones. Yeah, he hasn't been great. Again, I understand he's older, but he's also a rookie playing his first year in the league on a team with a lot of players ahead of him in the lineup. But I have been a little disappointed. He's not quite been the connector that I thought he would be. He's not been nearly as effective off ball like I thought he was going to be heading into or after the draft, heading into the season. He's really struggling. I shouldn't say struggling, but he's certainly learning a lot playing off ball with guys like Shai and Dub and others when he doesn't have the ball in his hands like he's basically known all of his career. But it hasn't been as nearly promising as I thought. Other than that, great podcasting. This is why I hate going through the comments solo. Connor B. Shout out Connor B. Good friend from the Discord who leads all of our streams for our live watch parties in the Discord. We have spots to free up. Flagler, DJ, Oos to some extent, still room for the team to get better. People thinking we can't draft 3 kids are not correct. I mean, that's the other thing too, Connor, that I keep thinking about, especially heading into Thursday's deadline, but definitely this offseason is, I mean, we know how much Presley values his draft picks and how much he values bringing in young players on cost-controlled contracts that you can keep long-term and develop and turn into impactful role players. I mean, I think that's exactly why we'll see some of these guys get waived or moved to create room for some of these other guys, even if it's only 2 rookies that they bring in next year, whatever it may be. I think that's it. Carl's calling out Nick and I for predicting an L tonight, and that is fair. We were very, very wrong. Now, to be fair, my reasoning was because I thought all 3 of Dub, Caruso, and Kaysen were going to be out. I was correct there, but I did not anticipate the Wisconsin Herd to trot out there tonight and not the Milwaukee Bucks themselves. So anyways, I think that's all I've had. I've gone 28 minutes now about an absolute ass kicking from the Thunder, which is great. You guys provide some really good comments, and it's always fun to go through them. Like I said, I was trying to decide. So trade deadline obviously coming up on Thursday. And there's been even more rumors today after the Fox trade last night, and obviously the huge Luka AD trade on Saturday. The biggest thing I think coming out of that is that the Phoenix Suns, from multiple sources, Jake Fisher, I think Chris Mannix of SI, they both have talked about that, the Suns are certainly listening to offers for Kevin Durant. The Warriors are very interested. The Warriors, according to Anthony Slater of The Athletic, are in desperation mode and are trying to make a trade for a Kevin Durant to happen. And then also LeBron James, obviously he's in a very interesting position. It's been reported he doesn't want to or won't waive his no trade clause and wants to remain in LA with his son. But if he gets enough attention from a Golden State to play with Steph or elsewhere, and the Lakers aren't able to trade for a true center, like I've heard Mitchell Robinson, kind of make them a contender again, outside of just him and Luka, obviously being the focal points. Maybe he's willing to, there's a lot of unexpected fun plot lines heading into Thursday's trade deadline. So those were kind of the things I was going to mention if there was enough time. For the Thunder, we still haven't heard anything. Makes a ton of sense. Also, the Cam Johnson talk has really died down ever since the huge trades. So I'm curious to see if we get any more intel there before Thursday trade deadline, or if we just see a random team like Memphis or San Antonio or whoever trade for Cleveland, trade for him, or maybe he just stays with the Nets. outside of that, that's kind of the big storylines, I think, heading into the deadline. We'll see what happens with Jimmy Butler. From a Thunder standpoint, it seems like we're staying the course unless it's something small, like I mentioned, creating some open roster spots or consolidating draft picks. So that's probably what we have to look forward to. Or Sam Presti surprises us all and trades for Kevin Durant, and we'll have an insane podcast Thursday night. I think that's all I got. Thunder win 125-96 against the Bucks. And with Houston's loss tonight, Thunder now have a 7-game lead over Houston, and Memphis reclaims the second spot in the East. The Thunder have a pretty nice cushion there for first place heading into the All-Star break, assuming they don't just lose out from here. Even then, with still being first, which is pretty awesome. Up next, the Thunder played the Suns on Wednesday night, which is trade deadline eve, and we will see who the Suns trot out there. Could kind of be like the Bucks game tonight, where the Bucks don't play a lot of players, either due to injury or because those players are in trade conversations. So, or maybe a Jimmy Butler trade happens before then. Who knows? But a lot to look forward to this week. Trade deadline Thursday. I'm not sure if our guy Jacob Niffen is taking off like he usually does, if he can. But if he does, he might be going live during the deadline. And then obviously at some point, if the Thunder do something huge, we'll try and do an emergency pod ASAP. But if not, we will probably do a trade deadline, not post game, but a recap at some point Thursday evening if the Thunder do anything. And then Friday night, play the Raptors before the Sega Baba huge game against the Grizzlies on Saturday. So stay locked in here at the Uncontested. We're staying locked in for the I keep saying the trade deadline, for the All-Star break. Obviously a super fun season to be a Thunder fan. Another great night tonight. Appreciate all of your guys' support. And until next time, Wednesday, Thunder up.